They thought it was amusing to mock the only woman in the room. 12 decorated naval officers and me, the intelligence analyst they assumed was there to take notes. When the Admiral asked for my call sign, with that patronizing smile, laughter rippled through the briefing room. I stood, letting silence fall around me like a shroud. "Iron Widow," I answered. The Admiral's face drained of color. His coffee cup froze mid-air. Every screen in the secure room suddenly flickered to life, displaying classified footage he thought was buried forever. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you believe in the power of truth to surface even after years buried in darkness, subscribe to hear more stories of justice finally served. They thought it was a joke. I was the only woman in the briefing room, the lowest rank on paper, the one they assumed was there to format slides and nod. The Admiral wore that careful smile leaders practice in mirrors and said, "What's your call sign, Lieutenant? We should know what to call you when you panic." Laughter rolled across the table like loose brass. Lieutenant Commander Verena Blackwell kept her expression neutral as she stood before the 12 senior officers of Naval Special Warfare Command. The fluorescent lights of the briefing room cast harsh shadows across the polished oak table, where 12 men in decorated uniforms watched her with varying degrees of amusement. Her service dress blues felt suddenly constricting despite their perfect fit. She had anticipated this moment from the second her transfer request was approved, but reality always carried more weight than preparation. "Iron Widow, sir," she answered, her voice clear and measured. The laughter died mid-breath. Admiral Knox Hargrove's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth, suspended in air as if time itself had paused. His carefully cultivated smile collapsed into something unrecognizable, something like fear. Verena had arrived at the Virginia headquarters precisely 43 minutes earlier, credentials verified twice before being escorted to the high-security briefing room. The guard had glanced at her rank insignia, then at the briefing roster, before stepping aside with poorly concealed surprise. She was used to that reaction, the momentary calculation behind the eyes, assessing how a woman with her relatively modest decorations had secured a place in one of the most classified operational planning sessions in the Navy. "Lieutenant Commander Blackwell, Intelligence Analysis," she had announced upon entering the room, her credentials already displayed on her tablet. The 11 officers seated around the table had barely acknowledged her, continuing their pre-briefing conversations about golf handicaps and fishing expeditions. Only Commander Thorne, a veteran with silver at his temples and watchful eyes, had offered a polite nod as she took her place at the far end of the table. Admiral Hargrove had entered last, his chest bearing the weight of multiple combat decorations. The room had snapped to attention, conversations severed mid-sentence. He carried the confidence of a man accustomed to unquestioned authority, his gaze sweeping the room and landing briefly on Verena with a flicker of something unreadable. "At ease, gentlemen," he had said, emphasizing the last word just enough to make his awareness of her presence clear without directly acknowledging it. The operational briefing began with precision, detailing a high-risk extraction in contested waters near the Strait of Hormuz. Satellite imagery and intelligence reports flickered across the screens, as each officer contributed assessments from their areas of expertise. Verena observed silently, analyzing patterns in the data that others missed, waiting for the appropriate moment to speak. When the discussion turned to underwater topography affecting the extraction route, she recognized a critical oversight. "Sir, if I may," she interjected during a natural pause, "recent surveillance shows unidentified submarine activity in this quadrant that doesn't match our Allied movement schedules." The Admiral's hand rose immediately, cutting her off mid-analysis. "Lieutenant Commander, I believe your job is to compile the intelligence, not interpret it. Captain Merrick handles maritime threat assessment." Several officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Captain Merrick himself frowned slightly, recognizing the accuracy of her observation. But no one spoke as Varina nodded and returned to her notes, her face betraying nothing of the familiar sting. An aide approached the Admiral, leaning down to whisper something while handing over a tablet. Hargrove's expression shifted as he scanned the screen. His interest suddenly piqued. He looked up at Verena with new calculation in his eyes. "Lieutenant Commander Blackwell," he said, setting the tablet down carefully, "remind us all of your field experience. Your file makes for interesting reading." The room's attention shifted to her with newfound curiosity. This was the moment Verena had anticipated, the subtle probe disguised as casual interest, designed to expose her as an administrative appointee rather than a field-tested operator. 8 years intelligence analysis with the Fifth Fleet, sir, she replied evenly, specializing in covert maritime operations and hostage extraction scenarios. Any direct field deployments? He pressed. My operational history is primarily analytical, sir. The Admiral nodded with the satisfaction of confirmed assumptions. Theory over practice, then. As the briefing continued, a map of the Strait of Hormuz appeared on screen, familiar coastlines and depths that triggered memories Verena had carefully compartmentalized. For just a moment, her disciplined facade slipped, a micro-expression of recognition crossing her features before she could suppress it. The Admiral caught it. His eyes narrowed slightly. Familiar territory for you. Lieutenant Commander? Only through intelligence reports, sir, she answered, maintaining eye contact despite the sudden coldness in the room. Commander Thorne watched this exchange with unexpected interest, his attention shifting between Verena and the Admiral with the focus of someone connecting previously unrelated data points. The briefing proceeded, but something had changed in the atmosphere. The Admiral's questions became more pointed, his examples more specific. He was probing for something, testing her knowledge against information that shouldn't be accessible to someone with her official background. After outlining the extraction parameters, Admiral Hargrove leaned back in his chair, surveying the room with practiced confidence. For this operation, we'll need call signs for secure communications. Captain Merrick, you'll be Poseidon. Commander Walsh, Trident. He continued around the table, assigning names that reflected experience or inside jokes among the officers. When he reached the end, he paused, his gaze settling on Verena with calculated amusement. Gentlemen, we should include our analyst in the operational call signs, he announced, drawing the room's attention to her once more. His smile widened fractionally. What's your call sign, Lieutenant Commander? We should know what to call you when you panic. Laughter rolled across the table. Only Commander Thorne and 2 others abstained, watching Verena with curious intensity. The overhead lights seemed to brighten, exposing her isolation at the table's end. My call sign wasn't a nickname. It was a ledger, a promise, a name written once in red ink across a file that never should have existed. I had buried it the day they buried the mission that cost us more than anyone would admit. Verena stood slowly, her posture perfectly aligned as years of training demanded. The room quieted, officers expecting embarrassment or indignation, the typical reactions they'd witnessed from women trying to prove themselves in their world. Instead, she stood with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced far worse than mockery. My call sign is classified, Admiral, she said, her voice carrying easily across the suddenly silent room. The Admiral's smile hardened at the edges. Nothing in this room outranks my clearance, Lieutenant Commander. Humor me. I stood, let the room quiet itself, and answered the way you answer a roll call for ghosts. Iron Widow. The name hung in the air like spent brass. Admiral Hargrove's coffee cup remained suspended, his knuckles whitening around the handle. Commander Thorne straightened imperceptibly in his chair, recognition flashing behind his disciplined expression. Across the table, confused glances bounced between officers who recognized something significant had occurred without understanding what. The Admiral's face had drained of color. He knew it, not from rumor, but from a clearance level he thought no one could challenge. He had seen the dossier, with my call sign stamped over a night that officially never happened. This briefing is adjourned, Admiral Hargrove announced abruptly, gathering his materials with hands that betrayed the slightest tremor. We'll reconvene at 0800 tomorrow. The officers rose in confused silence, sensing the disruption but unable to identify its source. As they filed out, Commander Thorne lingered, positioning himself by the door until he and Verena were the last remaining in the room. I served with Riker, he said quietly as she gathered her tablet. The math never added up. 5 went in, 3 came back official. Verena's fingers stilled momentarily on her tablet screen. Riker was a name that appeared in no official records connected to her. A ghost from an operation that existed only in redacted files and nightmares. I don't know what you mean, Commander, she replied carefully. Thorne's weathered face revealed nothing, but his next words carried weight beyond their simplicity. You were there, weren't you? Before she could respond, the door opened. Two security officers in pressed uniforms stood at attention. "Lieutenant Commander Blackwell, Admiral Hargrove requests your immediate presence in his office." Verena nodded, slipping her tablet into her portfolio case. As she followed the security officers into the corridor, an aide rushed past, delivering a message to Commander Thorne. Verena caught a glimpse of the communication as Thorne read it, his expression darkening instantly. Their eyes met briefly across the widening distance. Thorne's lips moved silently, forming two words she could barely discern: "Files purging." Then the twist surfaced, not from me, but from the room itself. The screens flickered. The secure network auto-authenticated to a dormant contingency, an old failsafe tied to that name. A locked archive opened without a password, pulling helmet feeds and SATCOM logs the Admiral had claimed were lost. The journey through the labyrinthine corridors of Naval Special Warfare Command felt longer than the kilometers Verena had once traversed through hostile territory. Security cameras tracked their movement with mechanical precision, recording every step toward what would either be vindication or the end of a career built on careful navigation of half-truths. Admiral Hargrove's office occupied the corner position of the command building, its windows overlooking the Chesapeake Bay. Unlike the sterile briefing room, his personal space was a museum of accomplishment, shadow boxes displaying medals, photographs with presidents and foreign dignitaries, mementos from operations that had earned him his legendary status. A large naval flag hung behind his desk, its blue field a backdrop for the man who had shaped special operations policy for over a decade. The Admiral stood at the window, back to the door, as Verena was escorted in. The security officers departed without a word, closing the door behind them with practiced discretion. "That call. Sign was buried with Operation Ghostfall," Admiral Hargrove said without turning. "All files, all mentions, all evidence. Buried by direct presidential order." He turned slowly, studying her with the focused intensity of a man reassessing a threat. "How do you know it?" The footage didn't show panic. It showed him ordering a withdrawal that left civilian contractors behind. It showed me breaking that order to get them out. It showed a signature under a falsified after-action report that erased my team's role and inflated his. "I earned it, sir," Verena answered evenly. "May 17th, 2019, Northern Strait of Hormuz." The Admiral's expression cycled through disbelief, calculation, then controlled anger. He moved to his desk, activating a secure terminal with a series of practiced keystrokes. "Your service record shows you were assigned to intelligence analysis in Bahrain during that period." "Yes, sir, that's what my official record shows." The implication hung between them, heavier than the medals on his chest. His jaw tightened fractionally, the only outward sign of his internal recalculation. He had expected denial, perhaps even confusion, not confirmation. "You're implying you have an unofficial record, Lieutenant Commander." "I'm implying nothing, sir," Verena replied. "I'm stating that I earned that call sign during Operation Ghostfall." The Admiral reached for the console, then stopped. Every officer present had already seen enough. Medals looked different under honest light. Chairs shifted, eyes lowered. The silence wasn't respect, it was judgment, finally given a voice. Admiral Hargrove watched Verena for a long moment before speaking. The sunlight through the bay windows illuminated half his face while casting the other half in shadow. A fitting metaphor for the man whose public persona had diverged so completely from his classified actions. "Your psychological evaluations suggest a concerning pattern of insubordination and attachment to outcomes beyond your control," he said finally. His fingers tapped a precise rhythm on his desk, activating a secure file on his monitor. "I've been monitoring your career with interest, Lieutenant Commander." He rotated the screen to face her. Displayed were transfer requests she'd submitted over the past 3 years, all denied. Performance evaluations altered to emphasize minor infractions while minimizing commendations. Promotion board recommendations mysteriously withdrawn before final consideration, all bearing the Admiral's authorization code. "You've been blocking my career," Verena said, the statement flat rather than accusatory. "I've been protecting naval intelligence from an officer with questionable judgment," he countered. "Operation Ghostfall was a catastrophic failure by every metric. The fact that you consider your actions during that debacle something to be proud of only confirms my assessment." Verena remained perfectly still, her expression unchanged. Only someone who knew her might notice how her breathing had shifted to the measured pattern of a sniper, controlling their heartbeat before taking a shot. "Is that the official assessment of Operation Ghostfall, sir?" The Admiral's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The official assessment is classified beyond your clearance, Lieutenant Commander, as is the operation itself." He closed the file with a decisive tap. "You're being removed from the mission planning team, effective immediately." He pressed a button on his desk, and the door opened to reveal the same security officers who had escorted her in. "Security will escort you to debriefing room 4 for some routine questions about your unauthorized knowledge of classified operations." The corridors of Naval Special Warfare Command felt suddenly hostile as the security officers led Verena away from the Admiral's office. Unlike her arrival, this journey carried the unmistakable weight of disgrace. Junior officers averted their eyes as she passed. The building itself seemed to contract around her, ceiling lights casting progressively shorter shadows as they descended to the lower levels where debriefing rooms, a polite term for interrogation chambers, awaited those who had fallen from favor. As they rounded the corner toward a bank of elevators, a commanding voice cut through the tension. "Security override Tango 6 Delta." Commander Thorne approached from a side corridor, his bearing projecting absolute authority despite the Admiral's superior rank. The security officers hesitated, then stepped back respectfully, recognizing the override code reserved for counterintelligence operations. "I need a moment with the Lieutenant Commander," Thorne said, his tone leaving no room for objection. He guided Verena toward an alcove where security cameras visibly rotated away from their position. Someone in the system was actively providing them cover. Thorne's expression was grave, his words measured but urgent. 5 operators survived Ghostfall. Official record says 3. His voice dropped lower. The math never added up. Verena's pulse quickened, but she maintained her composure. "Why are you telling me this, Commander?" "Admiral's been purging records since your transfer request crossed his desk. Anything connected to Ghostfall is being systematically erased from the system." He glanced at his secure tablet. "Including your actual service record." With practiced discretion, Thorne slipped a small drive into Verena's palm. Riker suspected this day might come. That's why he built the failsafe. The name sent an electric current through Verena's carefully maintained composure. "Riker died in a training accident 3 years ago." "That's the official report," Thorne replied grimly. "Just like the other 2 Ghostfall survivors who filed contradicting statements about what happened that night." Before Verena could process the implications, an alarm sounded throughout the facility. Red security lights pulsed through the corridor, bathing them in crimson warnings. "Security breach in the classified archives," announced the automated system. "All personnel report to designated containment areas." Thorne checked his tablet, eyes widening. "They've started the purge. You have 15 minutes before they lock down every terminal in the facility." His expression hardened with resolve. "Server room B4. It's the only access point with the bandwidth to handle the protocol." "What protocol?" "The Iron Widow protocol. It wasn't just your call sign." He met her eyes with urgency. "It was Riker's insurance policy." The facility transformed around them as the security alert elevated from yellow to red. Personnel rushed through corridors, security checkpoints doubled their staff, and system administrators frantically worked to contain what they believed was an external breach. The chaos provided perfect cover as Verena navigated toward the server room, her credentials still active enough to pass preliminary checkpoints. Server room B4 hummed with the mechanical breath of the cooling systems and the soft blue glow of monitoring stations. Unlike the command center's imposing display of military authority, this room represented pure functionality, the beating heart of Naval Special Warfare's digital infrastructure. Verena slipped inside during a shift change, the technicians too distracted by the facility-wide alert to question her presence. She located an isolated terminal, inserting the drive Thorne had provided. Fragmented video files appeared instantly. Helmet camera footage showing a night operation in terrain she recognized instantly, despite the green-tinted night vision overlay. The timestamp matched her memories precisely. May 17th, 2019. Operation Ghostfall. Radio transmissions played through her earpiece, voices emerging from a past that officially didn't exist. "Commander Hargrove, Confirmed hostile presence exceeds intelligence estimates. All teams prepare for immediate extraction. Operator, sir, we have 8 civilians still unaccounted for. Contractor team reported in Northeast Quadrant. Commander Hargrove, confirmed KIA, team must withdraw. That's an order. The footage shifted to Verina's own helmet cam, recorded proof of her breaking formation, leading a small team back into the compound against direct orders. The grainy footage showed what happened next. 7 civilian contractors found alive, hidden in a storage room. The extraction that followed under heavy fire. A critically wounded operator, Riker, dragged to safety by Verina herself. Her fingers moved instinctively to the scar at her collarbone, hidden beneath her uniform, a permanent reminder of the bullet that had nearly ended her career that night. The official report listed it as a training accident 2 weeks later, after the operation had been classified and all participants sworn to silence. Verina navigated deeper into the drive's contents, accessing her own classified file, heavily redacted. Even at her clearance level, a photo appeared, showing her receiving a medal in a private ceremony, the medal immediately placed in a box rather than on her uniform. The citation read only, "For actions above and beyond the call of duty during classified operations." What wasn't shown in the image was what happened immediately after: the binding non-disclosure agreement, the transfer to a non-combat role, the subtle beginning of a systematic campaign to distance her from operational planning. A security alert flashed on the terminal. Her access had been flagged. The system would lock her out in minutes. She quickly downloaded the critical files, the weight of what she'd discovered settling like lead in her stomach. The Admiral hadn't just falsified reports. He'd deliberately abandoned American contractors, then systematically eliminated or silenced everyone who knew the truth. As she disconnected the drive, the server room door opened. Captain Rain Westerly, head of security, entered alone, hand resting casually near her sidearm. "That's far enough, Lieutenant Commander." Verina turned slowly, maintaining deliberate, non-threatening movements. "Captain?" Instead of drawing her weapon or calling for backup, Westerly closed the door and engaged the manual lock. "You're not the first person to access these files recently," she said quietly. "The Admiral has left a trail of suspicious accidents in his wake." "Why tell me this?" "Because 3 operators from Ghostfall died in separate accidents after filing reports that contradicted the official record." Westerly moved closer, lowering her voice further. "And the Admiral has just called an emergency security meeting about a serious breach. Your career ends in 30 minutes unless you can prove what really happened." Verina held up the drive. "I have proof, but it's not enough. My word against his, and he outranks me in every way that matters." "The system was designed to bury the truth," Westerly acknowledged. "You can't fight it alone." "I never expected to." "You're not supposed to," Westerly responded with unexpected intensity. "That's why Riker built the failsafe before he died. Iron Widow isn't just a call sign. It's an activation protocol for every file connected to Ghostfall." The pieces suddenly aligned in Verina's mind. Riker, always the contingency planner, always thinking 3 steps ahead, would have anticipated this moment, would have built a system that could bypass the very classification protocols he helped design. How does it work? It will open all sealed files simultaneously, but only in a specific setting, the primary briefing room, with full command staff present as witnesses. Westerly's expression hardened. "Exactly the setting the Admiral has just arranged for your public disgrace." The facility's alarm system intensified, signaling escalated security protocols. Through the server room windows, Verina could see armed response teams moving with tactical precision through adjacent corridors. "They're coming for you," Westerly confirmed. "The Admiral has authorized a Level 5 security response, reserved for imminent threats to classified information." Verina weighed her options, the tactical assessment automatic after years of training. "I need to reach that briefing room." "You'll never make it through standard corridors. Security has locked down all primary access points." "I don't need standard corridors." Verina moved to a maintenance panel near the server racks, quickly removing the cover to reveal a narrow utility passage. "Ghostfall wasn't my first extraction under fire." Westerly nodded with newfound respect. "The emergency security meeting begins in 12 minutes. I can delay the response teams, but not for long." As Verina prepared to enter the maintenance tunnel, Westerly handed her a security badge. This will grant you emergency override access to the briefing room. Once inside, you'll have approximately 20 seconds before security protocols engage. 20 seconds is all I need. Lieutenant Commander, Westerly said, her professional demeanor slipping for just a moment. Riker believed in you, said you were the only one who would choose truth over career when the moment came. The name still carried weight, still opened wounds that had never properly healed. He died because of that belief. No, Westerly corrected firmly. He died because he followed the same moral compass that guided you that night. The difference is, he made sure the truth couldn't stay buried forever. Alarms continued to sound throughout the facility as Verena navigated the narrow maintenance tunnels connecting the server infrastructure to the command level. The space was tight, designed for accessing cable runs rather than human passage, forcing her to move in a crouched position that aggravated old injuries. Dust particles danced in the dim emergency lighting, each breath a reminder of confined spaces she'd navigated under far more dangerous circumstances. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. Once again crawling through darkness because of Operation Ghostfall, once again moving against orders toward an objective others had abandoned. The Iron Widow spider, namesake of her call sign, was known for its persistence and ability to survive environments that destroyed others. The comparison had seemed darkly appropriate after she'd survived a mission that claimed so many others. She reached a junction where the maintenance tunnel intersected with the ventilation system for the command level. According to the facility schematics she'd memorized upon arrival, a habit from years of operational planning, this access point should position her directly above the senior staff corridor, 20 meters from the main briefing room. The ventilation grate offered limited visibility of the corridor below. Security personnel moved with heightened alertness, communications devices crackling with tactical updates. Through fragments of conversation, Verena pieced together the developing situation. All access points covered. Admiral wants her contained before the briefing. Potential compromise of classified materials. She waited for a momentary gap in the patrol pattern, then silently removed the grate and dropped to the corridor floor with practiced precision. The security badge Westerly had provided granted access to a side door leading to the briefing room's preparation area, a small anteroom where presenters typically organized materials before briefings. Through the interior window, Verena could see senior officers beginning to assemble. Admiral Hargrove had not yet arrived, but Commander Thorne was already seated, his expression revealing nothing, as junior officers prepared the room's electronic systems for the emergency session. Captain Westerly entered from the main door, catching Verena's eye for just a moment before deliberately focusing her attention elsewhere. Verena checked her watch. 3 minutes until the scheduled start of the briefing. The Admiral was notoriously punctual, building his reputation on precision in all things. She would have one opportunity when he called the meeting to order, before he could control the narrative. As she waited, Verena accessed the drive once more, confirming the activation sequence Westerly had described. The Iron Widow protocol was elegantly simple, a voice-authenticated command that would bypass normal security protocols and display all files connected to Operation Ghostfall simultaneously across all briefing room screens. Riker had designed it not as a weapon of revenge, but as insurance against the very kind of institutional betrayal unfolding today. The briefing room doors opened again, admitting Admiral Hargrove flanked by 2 security officers. His expression betrayed nothing as he took his position at the head of the table, arranging his materials with practiced efficiency. Additional security personnel took positions at each entrance, their presence signaling the unusual nature of this gathering. "Gentlemen," the Admiral began, "thank you for responding promptly. We have a serious security breach to address." Verena's moment had arrived. She swiped the security badge, the door to the briefing room sliding open with a soft hydraulic hiss. Every head turned as she entered unescorted, moving with calm purpose to her previous seat at the table. Whispers rippled through the assembled officers. Admiral Hargrove's expression hardened, though he maintained his composure. "How fitting that our security breach has decided to join us," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Lieutenant Commander Blackwell has accessed classified materials far beyond her clearance level," he announced to the room. "This briefing will serve as preliminary documentation of these violations before formal charges are processed." Verena remained standing near the main display terminal. "I'd like to address the accusations against me, sir." The Admiral gestured dismissively. "This isn't a hearing, Lieutenant Commander. This is notification of your immediate suspension pending investigation. With respect, sir, Verena continued, her voice clear and steady. I believe relevant evidence should be considered before conclusions are drawn. The room grew unnaturally still. Officers exchanged uncertain glances, sensing the unusual tension between the Admiral and the junior officer, who should, by all normal protocols, be deferring to his authority without question. What evidence would that be? The Admiral asked, impatience edging his tone. His finger hovered near the security call button on the table's edge. Verena met his gaze directly. The moment stretched between them, a silent recognition that whatever came next would permanently alter both their futures. The briefing room lights seemed to brighten, casting every face in stark relief as history balanced on the edge of revelation. Authentication protocol, she said clearly, ensuring the room's audio systems would capture each syllable. Iron Widow. The room's screens flickered simultaneously, security systems engaging automated protocols without any further command. Red authentication warnings flashed across every display as the room's electronic locks engaged with audible clicks. No one could enter or exit. Admiral Hargrove's hand jerked away from the security button as if burned. "What is this?" he demanded, rising from his chair. "Security override. Authorization Hargrove Delta 7. "Override denied," responded the system's automated voice. "Priority protocol in effect." The screens activated simultaneously, displaying multiple video feeds with a common date stamp. May 17th, 2019, Operation Ghostfall. The Admiral frantically tried to terminate the display from his control panel, but each command was rejected with the same message. Override denied, priority protocol in effect. "This is a breach of national security," the Admiral declared, his voice rising as he looked to the security officers positioned at the doors. "Terminate these displays immediately." But the security officers remained at their posts, transfixed by what was unfolding on the screens. Every officer in the room watched as the evidence appeared across multiple displays. Screen 1, helmet camera footage showing then Commander Hargrove ordering withdrawal despite intelligence that civilians were still alive. Commander Hargrove. Confirmed hostile presence exceeds intelligence estimates. All teams prepare for immediate extraction. Operator, sir, we have 8 civilians still unaccounted for. Contractor team reported in Northeast Quadrant. Commander Hargrove. Confirmed KIA. Team must withdraw. That's an order. Screen 2, split screen displaying his after-action report with his signature, listing all civilian contractors as KIA prior to operation commencement. Screen 3, footage from Lieutenant. Commander Blackwell's helmet cam, showing her leading a team back into the compound against orders, locating 7 civilian contractors alive and hidden in a storage area. Screen 4, medical evacuation footage showing the successful extraction of those civilians and 1 critically wounded operator, Lieutenant Riker. As the footage continued to play, the officers' expressions transformed from confusion to shock to something harder to define, a collective recognition of truth long suppressed. Admiral Hargrove stood frozen at the head of the table, his legendary composure fractured as his carefully constructed narrative disintegrated in real time. A final document appeared, classified medal citations for the operators involved in the extraction, including Verena's Iron Widow designation, awarded to operators who continue mission objectives despite catastrophic team losses or command structure failure. The room remained absolutely silent as the footage concluded. Admiral Hargrove finally recovered enough to attempt damage control. "This footage lacks proper context," he said, his voice steadier than his expression. "In the heat of combat, with limited intelligence and an entire team at risk, difficult decisions must be made." "I was your XO on that operation," Commander Thorne said, standing. All eyes shifted to him, a respected senior officer whose word carried weight. "This footage represents exactly what happened. You abandoned those contractors and falsified reports claiming they were already dead." Captain Westerly stepped forward from her position near the door. 3 operators who filed reports contradicting yours died under suspicious circumstances within 18 months of Ghostfall. The room's atmosphere shifted palpably as the implications settled over the assembled officers. Admiral Hargrove reached again for the system controls, but stopped as he realized every person in the room was watching him with new awareness. This was one difficult call in a combat situation, he said, his voice taking on a desperate edge. The entire team was at risk. I made a command decision based on the information available at the time. Verena spoke for the first time since activating the protocol, her voice quiet but carrying effortlessly through the silent room. It wasn't about team risk, Admiral. It was about the intelligence those contractors carried. She activated one final file on the main display, a partially recovered document showing weapons transactions to hostile forces, bearing signatures that implicated several high-ranking officers, including Hargroves. You left them behind because they discovered your side operations, Verena continued, each word measured and precise. The contractors were intelligence analysts embedded with local assets, tracking weapons shipments that were supposed to be destroyed, but instead were being diverted to unofficial channels. The document expanded to show transaction dates, weapons serial numbers, and financial transfers through shell corporations, all with connections to a program the Admiral had overseen before his promotion. And every officer who questioned the official story met with accidents or career destruction, she concluded. Lieutenant Riker's training accident, Captain Monroe's equipment malfunction during a routine dive, Lieutenant Ferris's unexpected transfer to an unsecured outpost where he was killed by a roadside bomb. Admiral Hargrove's legendary composure finally shattered completely. "You have no idea what you've done," he snarled, lunging toward Verena with unexpected speed. "Those weapons kept critical assets operational when Congress cut funding for necessary operations." He didn't make it 2 steps before being restrained by security officers who had been positioned at the doors. Captain Westerly moved forward, her expression grave but resolute. "Admiral Knox Hargrove," she announced formally. "You are relieved of command pending investigation into violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, including falsification of combat reports, dereliction of duty, and potential criminal conspiracy." As security led the Admiral away, the room remained silent, processing the seismic shift that had just occurred. Then, one by one, officers turned to Verena with new recognition in their eyes. Commander Thorne approached her first. "The operation that never happened just became official record," he said quietly. "Riker would be proud." The investigation that followed over the next 3 weeks sent shock waves through Naval Special Warfare Command. 5 additional officers were implicated in the weapons diversion scheme. 7 operations with suspicious casualty reports were reopened for investigation. Most significantly, the families of the operators who had died following Operation Ghostfall received formal acknowledgement of their service and sacrifice, truth replacing convenient fiction after years of institutional silence. When Verena entered the briefing room again 3 weeks later, the atmosphere had transformed. She now headed a special task force investigating compromised operations, her new insignia reflecting a long-overdue promotion. Officers stood as she entered, a sign of respect usually reserved for commanders with decades of service. The same table where she had once been mocked now served as the center for a different kind of operation, restoring integrity to mission reports that had been manipulated to protect careers rather than honor sacrifice. The room screens displayed information with appropriate classification markers, but without the selective editing that had once buried inconvenient truths. Lieutenant Commander Blackwell, Admiral Chandler, Hargrove's replacement, began the session. "Your task force has identified 17 operations with potential reporting discrepancies. Where do you recommend we focus initial resources?" Verena activated the main display, showing a timeline of suspicious incidents. "We should prioritize any operation where casualties were reported, without remains being recovered. Those present the highest likelihood of falsification to cover operational failures." The officers assembled around the table nodded with professional appreciation for her methodology. The mockery that had once filled this room had been replaced by something far more valuable: earned respect. During a brief recess, a junior female officer, Lieutenant Severa, recently transferred from intelligence analysis, approached Verena with a tactical suggestion regarding pattern recognition in the suspicious reports. The room fell momentarily quiet, echoing the earlier scene that had begun this story. "Excellent observation, Lieutenant," Verena said, ensuring her voice carried to the senior officers present. "Please continue." The lieutenant's analysis revealed a pattern of selective redaction across multiple mission reports, all containing similar language that could mask accountability failures. As she finished her presentation, several officers nodded appreciatively. "Outstanding work, Lieutenant," Admiral Chandler said. "That kind of pattern recognition is exactly what this task force needs." The meeting concluded with clear action items and assigned responsibilities. As officers filed out, Commander Thorne remained behind, waiting until he and Verena were alone. "The civilian contractors you saved have been asking to meet you," he said. "They've been cleared to visit headquarters next week." Verena looked up from her tablet, genuine surprise crossing her features. "They're coming here?" "For your promotion ceremony," Thorne confirmed. "Admiral Chandler believes the official recognition is long overdue." "Promotion?" "Captain Blackwell has a certain ring to it," Thorne said with the hint of a smile, "unless you'd prefer to remain a lieutenant commander." Later that week, Verena stood in the secure archives, surrounded by files that had once been inaccessible even to those with the highest security clearances. The Iron Widow Protocol had done more than expose one corrupt officer. It had created cracks in the entire system of selective classification that had protected careers at the expense of truth. She carefully placed a photograph into a file, showing her team from Operation Ghostfall, including faces that had been systematically erased from official records. Lieutenant Riker stood at the center, his expression serious, but eyes reflecting the quiet humor those who served with him had come to rely on during the darkest moments. Beside him stood Verena, younger and less guarded, still believing in the system they served. As she closed the file, the label caught the archive room's light. Operation Ghostfall, declassified. She touched the names briefly, a moment of quiet remembrance for those lost and those who survived but were erased from history. Not all could be recovered. Some losses were permanent, some damage, irreparable. But acknowledging the truth was the beginning of healing, both for the institution and for those who had sacrificed for it. The following week, Verena stood at attention in her dress uniform as Admiral Chandler presented her with captain's insignia in a ceremony attended by senior command staff and special guests. Among them sat 7 civilians, the contractors she had extracted during Operation Ghostfall, now able to witness the acknowledgement of actions that had saved their lives. After the formal ceremony, one of the contractors approached her, Dr. Elaine Harlow, the senior analyst who had discovered the weapons diversion scheme that had nearly cost them all their lives. "Captain Blackwell," she said, extending her hand, "after all this time, I can finally thank you properly." "I was just doing my job, Dr. Harlow." "No, you weren't," the analyst corrected gently. "You were doing what was right when following orders would have been easier." She handed Verena a small box. Inside lay a handcrafted pin, a small Iron Widow spider, meticulously detailed in dark metal with eyes that caught the light like tiny rubies. "You were a ghost to us that night," Dr. Harlow said quietly. "But we never forgot. Among ourselves, we've called you the Iron Widow for years, the one who survived when others wouldn't have, the one who came back for us when we'd been written off as acceptable losses." Verena studied the pin, emotions she rarely permitted herself to acknowledge rising to the surface. "I didn't do it alone." "No one does," Dr. Harlow agreed. "But someone has to be first through the door. Someone has to be willing to risk everything when the system fails." Later that evening, Verena returned to the briefing room alone. The space was quiet now, the screens dark, the chairs empty. She stood where she had stood 3 weeks earlier, when she had spoken her call sign and changed the course of her career and countless others. The room no longer felt hostile. The fluorescent lights that had once seemed to expose her isolation now simply illuminated a space where work happened, important work, work that mattered, work that honored those who served, rather than those who commanded. On the main screen, she brought up the file containing the names of all operators lost in suspicious circumstances following classified operations, not just those connected to Admiral Hargrove, but dozens more identified during the investigation. Each name represented unfinished business, truth still waiting to be uncovered. "They called me Iron Widow because the missions meant to end me never did," she said softly to the empty room. But the real strength wasn't surviving. It was making sure no one else was forgotten. As she turned to leave, she noticed a small note in her original file, left by Riker years before his death. "The widow's strength isn't her venom, it's her patience. Truth may be buried, but it never dies. The date on the note revealed he had anticipated this moment long before his accident and had been preparing evidence and the failsafe protocol for years, trusting that someday someone would have the courage to activate it. He had known what the system was capable of, had recognized the corruption taking root, and had created a way to expose it when the time was right. Verena touched the Iron Widow pin, now fastened to her uniform, beneath her visible decorations, a private symbol of a truth that had finally emerged from darkness. In the military, symbols mattered. Ranks, insignia, medals, all represented something beyond their physical form. This small spider represented something that couldn't be awarded by the institution, but was perhaps more valuable. The quiet knowledge that when everything had been aligned against the truth, she had stood for it anyway. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for anything. The room had answered for me. They called me Iron Widow because the missions meant to end me never did, and because every time someone tried to write me out of the story, the truth learned how to write itself back in. That morning, I didn't reclaim a reputation. I turned a locked door into a witness and left the handle where everyone could see it.